Hello, everyone. I am Lauren Alvarez, so I am excited to be here. We're going to have a new class that we haven't offered through the Oklahoma Family Network, The Power of Connecting with Kids, and it's working off a book called Connections Over Compliance. So it's got some great information. I hope you enjoy that. So I'm Lauren Alvarez. I love teaching for Oklahoma Family Network. They do so many amazing classes and supports for families. I'm a school counselor by day at Jenks East Elementary. Absolutely love my job working with third and fourth graders. And I love watching their development and how much they change and grow. And just, it's such an impactful age to share great information. I also teach a lot of parenting classes. So I'm a certified parent educator. I've been trained in parents as teachers in active parenting and practical parent education, do a lot of stuff with parenting with love and logic, and thoroughly love that. I've been teaching parenting classes for Family and Children Services. They're helping children cope with divorce workshops and weekly parenting classes for them, and really enjoy that. And then I'm a wife and mother to four beautifully neurodivergent children. So great thing for you to know is I'm not just someone coming in and just talking about stuff that has to do with kids and parenting and all that. I've been through the thick of it with you. So I currently have at home still, I have a 14-year-old middle school daughter. She's an eighth grader. And then my sons, they're 23, 26, and 28 years old. They are grown and all living all over. So I miss them, but really getting excited about the holidays coming up. We'll have all of us in the same house for 2 hours and 2 days and 6 hours, something along those lines. So looking forward to that. So this is my lovely family. Looking forward to another Christmas so I can update that picture. Kind of the goals for tonight is really wanting you to walk away with a reframe, like a lens shift when it comes to this idea of what do I do about behavior? So Oklahoma Family Network has a ton of videos on their YouTube channel. We've talked about creative consequences. We've talked about effective communication. We've talked about helping the anxious child. There's so many things, dealing with anger in the family. There's so many different things that have to do with behavior. But when it comes to actually what we think about it, why do kids do what they do? That's where I'm hoping for a reframe, like a paradigm shift for you. Really have an understanding of what's going on in the brain and body when kids or parents or teachers are struggling, because it all starts in the brain. That is one thing I'm thrilled about. Is a lot of the new parenting books and experts are really hitting this neuroscience research and really showing how that impacts behavior. But parenting strategies are still catching up to all of this new great information. Really take some time to consider and evaluate your personal discipline strategies. Why do you do what you do? What are your thoughts about why kids behave the way they behave? Just really have some practical strategies for connecting with children, especially when they're challenging. It's easy to connect when everything's going great. It's a little bit more difficult when things are frustrating. The other thing I always like to say in all of my classes is give it time. If you have been parenting or teaching or whatever field you're in, let's say for 10 years, it might take 10 months for you to start to see some real systemic change. When I was going through, trying to set goals for myself and all that, I remember reading in a magazine that for every year you've been doing something, it might take a month to break that habit. So if you have been thinking about behavior for as long as you've been alive and had your certain thoughts about why everybody does what they do, it might take some time to notice some change. So give it time, not just for yourself, but also for the kids, because they don't just change overnight either. You know, brain patterns and behavior patterns have all been established. So it takes a little time to make some changes. So give it some time. All right. Now, here's where the paradigm shift hopefully will come. So there's this great book, Connections Over Compliance by Lori Desautels. I was first introduced to her work with a professional development we had at my school. One of our high school psychology teachers, she went and got an additional certificate. So you can get your, bachelor's degree and different master's degrees and stuff. She actually did a certificate program with Dr. Desautels, and it was called Applied Education Neuroscience. So they learned all this stuff about the brain and behavior based on her book, Connections Over Compliance. And then what does that look like in the classroom? What does that look like when you're working with kids? So these strategies are definitely applicable for parents, they're applicable for teachers, anyone who works with kids. But her website is amazing. So I'm going to click on the website right now just so you can kind of see some of the resources that she has. I just want to make sure we see what's showing on the screen. And yep, good, it's showing. So if you go to her website, she has all these great resources. So if you click on resources, there's all sorts of free lessons, which is what I like. But she has videos, she has podcasts, she has printables. So you'll even recognize some of these embedded into the presentation, nervous system survival responses, all these different things about the brain and the body, goes into what teaching or interacting with children would look like with this applied educational neuroscience type lens, different discipline strategies, all through the lens of applied neuroscience. Here's what we know about the brain. How can we apply that information into a useful setting when you're working with kids? So lots of great resources on her particular website. Highly, highly recommend that. This presentation will be emailed to you. So all of these links and things that I'm referencing, everything you see here, you'll get, plus I'll send a whole bunch of extra handouts. Now, here's some things, some paradigm shifts. Paradigm is your way of looking at the world or looking at a certain topic. A lot of times we're not even aware of our paradigms until it's challenged. There's this thing called cognitive dissonance. If I think something should be a certain way, and I have a life experience that doesn't line up with what I think it should be, or I get new information that doesn't line up with the information I currently have, that creates a dissonance, kind of a conflict, kind of some tension. So we have some options. We can ignore it, or we can integrate that new information. And sometimes we're getting rid of old information. Sometimes we're integrating it so it's a complementary thing, but it's a shift. It's a shift in our way of thinking. So lots of great information that helps you make that shift in her book. First off, a child's not giving me a hard time. The child or student is having a hard time. While they're having a hard time, they're probably not so fun to be around. Their behavior can be maddening, but they're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time and expressing that with whatever that behavior looks like. It could be defiance. It could be work avoidance. It could be shutdown. It could be anger. It could be conflict. But the source of that is because they're having a hard time. This is what they're acting out. The root of discipline is to teach. So really moving away from this punitive, I'm going to make you do good by having you feel bad. Again, we're still going to allow for consequences. We'll talk about that, but the root of discipline is to teach. If we get away from that, we don't ever teach the kids the skills that they need to actually make good choices. Behavior is communication. Now, behavior is irritating. Behavior is communication. We need to get curious. All right, if they're continuing to act up at this time of the day, wonder why. I wonder what's going on with them. When I approach something with wonder, it's got a whole different attitude to it. Kids do well when they can. Not all of the children that we get to inherit as teachers, not all of the children that we have on our own. They're all wired in their own way. They've had their own life experiences. They do well when they can. It's not like kids wake up and just cannot wait to just ruin everyone's day. Kids do well when they can. And again, that Lori Desautels book, Connections Over Compliance, and this is the link to those resources that I just told you about. Her website is just a really, really rich resource. Another major paradigm shift for me in this information was, instead of thinking, oh, they're just doing this for attention seeking behavior, change this to connection seeking behavior. They're doing this because they're seeking connection. It's a subtle shift, but it makes a big difference. If you see a child differently, you'll see a different child. If I have different thought processes about why a child might be doing something, I can respond with empathy versus responding with harshness. So lots of great ideas. Because of the power of neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to change and grow, you can in fact reframe your world and rewire your brain to be more objective. You have the power to see things as they are so that you can respond thoughtfully, deliberately, and effectively to everything you experience. It's a quote by Elizabeth Thornton. we can change our thinking. We can rewire our brains so that we can be more effective. All right. Now, here are also, I always refer to these, so you'll probably see these in a lot of my classes. I just have my heroes in the field. And I added, so Lori Desautels, she wasn't on here a year ago. And, since being introduced to her at a training I went to, now she's one of my favorites as well. So Dr. Barbara Sorrells, she is a rock star. She is in the Tulsa area. She has her business is called Connected Kids, does tons of professional development for teachers and works with families, and is a really big expert in child trauma, how it impacts behavior, different things that you can do. I go to absolutely every training she has available, and she does a lot of consulting with schools. So I'm blessed to be able to interact with her in that regard. But check out our website. She also has some great professional developments on there that you can kind of watch on your own. Dr. Bruce Perry was kind of a pioneer in what's called the neurosequential model of child development, which is kind of tracking trauma based on when it happened in a child's developmental stages and how that impacts behavior. Because if you experience trauma at a certain developmental stage, you will kind of stay stuck in that developmental stage. So great, great information there. And he has tons of books and videos and everything about that. Dr. Dan Siegel is another powerhouse. He is this really intelligent neuroscience that takes really detailed information and makes it understandable to the normal human being. And so any book that he's written that have read or any video I've watched of his is just fantastic. And then already referred to Dr. Desautels. She has that Revelations in Education. So moving right along. Now, we're going to kind of go through 3 steps. Step 1, when we're dealing with and understanding behavior in kiddos, we need to first identify the state of the brain. Second, we're going to rethink our discipline strategies to make sure we're applying effective strategies based on what state of the brain they're in. And thirdly, we're really going to work hard on creating connections. That's going to be the 3 big chunks of this presentation. All of those things working together can bring about changed behavior. From the ground up, like foundational, have these kids experiencing happy, healthy, safe, loving connections and the behavior that goes with when they feel safe and loved. So first off, we have to understand the brain. So again, you'll find that in most of the classes that I teach, I'm always referring to the brain in some way. So first off, I think it's really important for you to understand the different parts of our nervous system. So our emotions, as well as all the physical sensations and the ability for our muscles to move, all of that is processed through our nervous system. So there are 2 main parts of the nervous system, lots more details than this, but if I were going to kind of summarize it, there is the sympathetic nervous system, that's kind of the reactive part of our nervous system, and then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calm down response. So the sympathetic nervous system, basically that's always on. Our original brain development, more our brainstem, a lot of things that are our body's always scanning, our brain is always scanning the environment looking for the next threat. Now, the way that it is figuring out what might be a threat is it's using the senses, the seeing, the hearing, the smelling, the tasting, the touching, as well as some internal sensory systems that we have going on that we don't even think about. What is regulating our body temperature and what is making our heart beat faster or slower, all those kinds of things. So when you are in that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight space, your heart beats fast, you have shallow breathing, your pupils expand, your gut becomes inactive because all the blood is rushing to the organs that need it the most, the muscles that need it the most. Hormones rush through your body to give your muscles the power to fight or run away, but that leaves you feeling anxious, and it is trying to expend energy. It takes a lot of energy to keep active in the sympathetic nervous system. So if you or your child is continuously under stress without a lot of relief, then it is exhausting physically, emotionally, in so many ways. Parasympathetic nervous system, that's your relaxation response. And this is where you can do things on purpose. I tell this to my students all the time. You can do these on purpose, these things on purpose to trick your brain and body into calming down. If you do certain mindfulness things, certain breathing techniques, certain exercise, it automatically activates the calm down response. Your body can't even help itself. So you have to have these things in balance, but most of us stay stuck in the sympathetic nervous system when we want to be in the parasympathetic nervous system. And these are where our hormones rush in that makes lift our mood, that makes us feel good. This is a state of the body and the nervous system that's conserving energy. My breathing is full and shallow. My heart is beating in a regular rhythm. My gut is able to work because the blood flow is normal instead of rushing to my skeletal muscles to help me run or, away from the next threat. Now, these are some specific. Oh, I also wanted to refer to this. Dr. Perry's, Bruce Perry, his neurosequential model of childhood development. It really emphasizes this. And I think if parents can really understand this, or people who work with kids can really understand this, sometimes it'll help them not take all these behaviors so personally. Every single thing, every sensory input that's coming into our body, words, sounds, temperature, all the stuff, it's all processed through the brainstem, all right? Then as it works its way up and is processed and, perceived to be a threat or not a threat or whatever, it goes through the midbrain, the limbic system, and the upper parts, the higher part of um, our cognitive development is the cortical part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. I call it the thinking brain. We want our kids to be able to do things like have empathy, self-control, read, learn. We want all this upper level um, behavior. We can't get it unless down here at the brainstem it's organized. Unless down here at the brainstem it's in a calm state and it's not perceiving things as fight or flight. We can't get the good positive behavior without also acknowledging that what state is the brain in so that I can actually get there. That's where a lot of people kind of get tripped up and stay on this hamster wheel of responding to behavior. We're wanting all of this high level self-actualized behavior when we've got a kid who's in fight or flight. They're not going to learn math. They're not going to listen to instructions. They're not going to have self-control when they're in fight or flight. You have to understand everything goes through the brainstem. All right. Now, if you have a child who comes from trauma or has had some traumatic experiences, that brainstem tends to be disorganized. So we have to do specific things. There's therapies, there's rhythm, working rhythm into the daily environment. But there's even some videos we have on trauma in the brain on the Oklahoma Family Network. So watch some of those videos that will help. Now, on that Dr. Lori Desautels website, I have a link to the nervous system states charts, but this kind of goes into a little bit more detail. So we can have a nervous system survival response where a child's in a fight state. We might see yelling, criticizing, blaming, hitting, throwing, aggressive, demanding, reactive kind of behaviors. What's happening underneath? The feeling of fear, anxiousness, feeling pressured, frightened, unlovable, or stuck, that might be triggering these possible sensations where they're teary, their heart feels like it's pounding, they have burning sensations, they're tight, they're tense, they're electric, they're hot, they're fast, sharp, knotted. That's kind of the sensations their body's experiencing. But that's what's boiling under the surface. Here's what we notice: the behavior. Oh, don't you yell at me. You need to be nice to other people. Stop being so mean with the criticizing. We might be seeing this fight response. Okay. If we see a flight response, it's also kind of in that red zone. We might see the behavior of fidgeting, avoiding things, being unfocused, procrastinating, running, eloping, which is not going off and getting married, but like running away. We have kids, they say they eloped out of the classroom, which just means they left without permission, or disengaging. They're just kind of checked out. What's possibly underneath there? They're feeling restless, preoccupied, like they're overdoing stuff, they're overstimulated, they're pulled in too many directions, so they don't know where to start. They're scared, they're anxious. And the sensations they're feeling in their body, these queasiness, the buzzing, the prickly, dizzy, twitching, scattered breathlessness, that's all what's boiling under the surface. But all we're seeing is the behavior. Behavior is just information. All right. It's not, if we can pay attention to the behavior, we could probably guess what's going on underneath. Now, what if they are in a collapsed shutdown, like they are completely, the nervous system's completely overwhelmed? The behaviors we might see is, well, high absenteeism. They're absent. They're not there. They're not going out. They're not doing anything. They might be hiding, zoning out, unresponsive, like they don't even want to talk. I had a kid come in my room today. Teacher called me and like, hey, can you come talk to this kiddo? And he was overwhelmed. in his lab that he was in, a special education lab. He was overwhelmed and didn't understand the lesson. So he was getting frustrated and just, making grunting noises and stuff. So I brought him over into my room, put him in my hammock chair, get a little rhythm, and started to try to talk to him. He was shut down. He was not talking. I'm like, that's okay. Put a little blanket on him, said, I'm going to go over here on my computer for about 5 minutes. I'm going to let you swing in the hammock chair and you let me know when you're ready. And as he calmed his body down, the blanket came off. And then I moved back over there and he was able to talk about what he was frustrated about. But initially, he was totally shut down. They're isolated, scrolling, daydreaming, not completing work. They're tired, exhausted, might even like fall asleep, literally fall asleep to check out, totally disconnected. These are the frustrating behaviors we see when really what's going on underneath, they might feel lonely or terrified or hopeless or exhausted or judged, overwhelmed, abandoned, all alone. And they might be feeling these same kind of sensations, and knotted muscles and queasy and numb and void and flat and dull and hollow and empty and heavy. I even mentioned this when I was talking with a colleague last week. How are you doing? I'm like, I've been feeling really heavy lately with this new big project that we have at school. And when I think about it, I start to be like, this is hard because it's all new and it'll be fine, once everyone gets used to it. But literally, it was a feeling of heaviness, like a heaviness in my eyes. So that's a nervous system response. Here's where we would like our kids to be. If we want to see these behaviors, focused, friendly, collaborating, asking for help, kind, able to pause and stop and reflect and be creative, they need to be feeling peaceful, curious, hopeful, safe, connected, and engaged. And they might have fluffy, open, airy, bubbly, smooth, light, radiating, sparkling kind of sensations in their body. Their behavior, what we see, is an indication of what might be going on underneath. Now, with children, they're not aware. Oh, I'm feeling focused today. That must be coming from a feeling of peace. Oh, I'm feeling absent and unresponsive today. That must be coming from a feeling of hopelessness. They don't connect those dots. That's where we, as the adult, we can become like behavior detectives and think, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and get curious. I wonder what's going on. We can ask leading questions. We can notice things in the environment as we get to know a kiddo. That's going to really give us the information we need. Now, depending on the brain state they're in, um, it's very important that we have that awareness. I want to make sure, yeah, sound should be showing. So you kind of have this understanding of how emotions play into the brain. Here we go.
When we hear the word emotion, most of us think of love, hate, happiness, or fear. Those strong feelings we experience throughout life. Our emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body. When our brain detects a potential threat, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare us for a fight or flight response. When we detect or experience something rewarding, such as someone doing something nice for you, our brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, or serotonin. These are the chemicals that make us feel good and motivate us to continue on the task or behavior. In these instances, the feeling region of the brain kicks in before the thinking part. Sometimes the reactions of the feeling brain are so strong that it dominates our behaviors and we're unable to think rationally in the moment. Our emotions hijack our brain. While many of our emotional responses happen subconsciously, our thinking can influence our emotions, and sometimes this can be unhelpful. Just thinking about something threatening can trigger an emotional response. This is where we can manage our emotions with conscious thinking. Our emotions play a powerful role in the way we experience the world. Understanding and regulating our emotions through our thoughts and behaviors can help us take greater control of our brain and achieve our goals.
I'm a big believer in teaching kids this stuff. So when I go in and do my school counselor guidance lessons, I'm literally teaching them about their amygdala, that fight or flight part of their brain, their prefrontal cortex. We talk like a robot when we do that. Um, and that when their amygdala, their T-Rex brain is activated, it makes their thinking brain not work. Now, if I do things on purpose to activate my thinking brain, it helps calm down my T-Rex brain. I'm using this kind of terminology. I talk about neurochemicals and things like that. So the more kids can learn about the brain, here's what it helps them. It helps them understand, number one, they're not bad because they maybe didn't make good choices. They're not a bad child for feeling angry. They're not a weak child for feeling anxious. That's a very normal body response. It's a chemical going through your brain. What can I do on purpose to stir up those other calming chemicals? So I'm a big believer that if kids have an understanding of the brain as well as us, it has a whole different, makes us view behavior in a whole different way. All right. So continuing on. If a child's in survival brain, if they're in that red zone or that blue zone of being totally fight or flight or completely collapsed and shut down, limit your words and simply share your calm presence. That's what I did with that student today that came in. I could tell he didn't want to talk, so I stopped talking. All that words were going to do is to kind of keep him overstimulated when he was obviously in shutdown mode. I love this. Mr. Rogers is the best. If you never got to see Mr. Rogers growing up, if you're too young for that, it's too bad. Go watch reruns. He says, I'm convinced that when we help our children find healthy ways of dealing with feelings, ways that don't hurt them or anyone else, we're helping make our world a better, safer place. And it's so true. Just how he would talk to kids on his little TV show was so powerful. He taught them that feelings are normal, but helped them understand it. Now, for a kid, the reason why kids need us is their brains are still developing. When a child's born, their brain's half the size of a grown-up brain. By the age of 5, it's almost doubled in size. So those first 5 years are absolutely vital. But then, our brains don't fully stop developing until we're 25 or 26. So all these pieces of the brain that are working together or not working together really well and managing emotions and all those kinds of things, they need our help with that. They need what's called co-regulation. So that's kind of that space between two people where it feels safe. I might be in a really heightened emotional state. Someone comes alongside me that's regulated, and we also have an existing connection. And now I've just created a feeling of safety. That's a safe space. It's emotionally available space where I don't have to pretend to not feel the feelings I'm feeling. It's a consistent space. And it's a place where we can sense and speak our minds and our hearts with a feeling of trust. That's a direct quote from Dr. Desautels. Now, co-regulation is hard for the adults if we're not regulated. So a lot of this has to do with awareness of ourselves. Where am I at in my mental state? Because I can't help co-regulate a child and deal with their behavior and change some of that more frustrating behavior if I'm not regulated myself. So here's a quick video we're going to watch that kind of explains co-regulation and how it can be a little bit different from birth through adulthood. There's 3 key parts that she mentions that really help with this co-regulation, creating this safe space of connection where someone can feel the feelings, speak the thoughts, and learn and be able to be supported in problem solving. First, it involves building a warm, responsive relationship. I can't fix behavior without relationship. Second, we're looking at the structures in our environment. If bedtime is total chaos for you and your children are not regulated at bedtime, let's look at the structure of bedtime. What are some preventive strategies I can put in place that help my child preventively stay regulated? And then also coaching them in self-regulation skills. Let's kind of watch what she has to say about this.
As I shared before, self-regulation develops over an extended period of time from birth through young adulthood. How the skills of self-regulation look changes at each stage of development. One constant across those ages is the essential role of caring adults in supporting self-regulation development. That support, what we call co-regulation, is comprised of 3 overlapping strategies: building a warm, responsive relationship, structuring the environment, and coaching self-regulation skills. By using the word overlap, I mean to emphasize that caring adults use these 3 strategies together to support self-regulation. Similar to how self-regulation skills may look different as we grow, the ways that caring adults enact these three components of co-regulation will look different over time. As an example, let's focus on structure, the environment. When a child is in preschool, caring adults structure the environment by providing a consistent routine, creating a predictable environment, communicating clear expectations, and enacting calm, consistent consequences. As a child moves into elementary school and then through high school, caring adults gradually modify these strategies for structuring the environment to reflect the increasing freedom and responsibility of children and youth. By the time someone is a young adult, the co-regulation strategies of structuring the environment shift to being about collaborative identification and creation of supportive environments. For example, a caring adult may help a young adult to identify people and places that encourage well-being. A caring adult may also help a young adult to create routines that build self-sufficiency. As a parent, aunt, and youth group leader, I must say it's pretty cool to see how I can keep using the same three key strategies as my children, my nieces and nephews, and youth group members grow into young adults. It's been quite a relief to realize that knowing the basics helps me to flex to where they are.
Okay. Now, if you notice, part of this co-regulation, it's not just me having a warm, fuzzy relationship with a child. There's pieces to it that create a feeling of safety. What creates a feeling of safety is structure. Having a fence that's keeping out the danger. Just like she said, that's going to change over time. So where you might have a lot more structure preventively for young children, that actually keeps them regulated. Think about it. If you had a 2-year-old daycare and the kid goes into 2-year-old preschool or 2-year-old daycare and the teacher's like, free choice all day. I mean, it would be absolute chaos. They would be all over the place. They would be crying. They'd be stressed out because that environment that lacks structure, so it doesn't help them be able to regulate their emotions because they don't know what to expect and there's too much freedom. Now, as she mentioned, as they get older, they should have a little bit more say, and you're now in more of a supportive role in helping them identify strategies and relationships and things that are going to help them. So it's not just the warm fuzzies of relationship. Structure is a piece of this, and actively teaching them self-regulation skills so that gradually they're not dependent on me to stay regulated. They can learn to self-regulate. That's the ultimate goal of all of this. Okay. All right, moving right along. Now, like I said before, you do have to have an awareness of where are you at. If we're going to co-regulate, I need to know where I'm at in my body. You do not lose any authority by saying, I'm not sure how to respond to that. I need a minute to go take my deep breaths. That's okay. And I would say that to my kids all the time. I'm not sure how to respond to that. I would go in the bathroom for 2 minutes and just take I would say, I need a minute so I can be nice, mommy. Because sometimes we need a minute to actually regulate so we can be available. What are my facial expressions saying? What's the tone of my voice is huge. Where are my hands? If I'm waving them around, that can be really threatening versus, super hard crossed arms, that could be threatening. Open hands, relaxed posture can be helpful. Is my breathing rhythmic, slow, steady, and calm? How's my posture? Is my body conveying a message of safety? And if there's one thing I walked away with, lots of different great skills and things like that when I was in grad school for my LPC degree, my licensed professional counseling degree. One guest speaker we had just still stands out to me. And one thing he said is he worked with some big tragedy in family relationships. And so he said, I just learned I talk soft, low, and slow. He changes the tempo of how he's talking. He talks low and he talks slow, and in a soft voice. I have over 500 children that are on my caseload as a school counselor. I don't know all of them by name, but I get called when there's a crisis. So I can walk into a situation mindful of my body language, getting down on their level, soft, low, and slow while I'm talking to them. And that creates a feeling of safety that they can latch on to my regulated state and eventually become regulated themselves. The behavior change starts with you. We want to blame the kids, but there are so many things we can do preventively and responsibly. So really be aware and adjust your tone of voice, posture, facial expressions. You can soothe or unintentionally escalate a child's stress response just by those nonverbals. Kids are tuned into nonverbals. I mean, just think of little ones. Before they could even talk or before they could even understand words, they understood body language. So this is a really important piece for co-regulation. Now, as far as this actively coaching and teaching co-regulation skills, learn some mindfulness things. So you'll get a bunch of handouts that have different family mindfulness schedules and stuff like that. But every kid and every adult is going to have their favorites. So these are some popular ones. The 5-4-3-2-1 method is where if I'm feeling overwhelmed and I may be in a fight or flight response of my brain or in a shutdown response, I'm just going to take a minute and I'm going to try 5 things I can see, 4 things I can feel, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. I'm forcing my brain out of the just to focus right here and right now. Now, I just was with a retreat last week with the Oklahoma Family Network, and one of the participants had a great thing. She goes, her child, she worked with a child who has cancer, and so if we are going to do your 5 senses and you're in the middle of the hospital, well, everything you see, feel, hear, smell, taste, and touch, that is overwhelming because those are all associated with pain or negative things or fear. So sometimes you can actually teach to visualize. Okay, let's think of your favorite place, your favorite memory. Okay, what are you seeing in the memory? What do you hear? What do you smell? What can you taste? What can you touch just from the memory? And that happy memory can kind of ground us and get us this way. I like this one a lot, especially since I like sensory, in that I like the feeling to kind of ground me. So with the 5 senses technique, with the 5-finger breathing, you're tracing your fingers. So while you're going up, you're going to breathe in. So we're going to breathe in and breathe out, breathe in and out. And you can loop through as many cycles as you need to. Just the sensation of feeling my finger touch my other hand and fingers, that kind of grounds me. Grounding meaning it brings me into right here, right now, in this moment. Not what I'm afraid of, not what I'm frustrated about, but just in this moment, what can I feel and can I bring it back to my breath? Those are some tangible things. There's tons and tons and tons of different things you can do, but it doesn't have to be huge. I know my brother-in-law, he actually did a thing for a while where he would set his watch to beep on the hour and he would just do a quick mindfulness thing. What's one thing I can see, hear, smell, taste, touch every hour on the hour? And it made a huge difference in just keeping his brain in a calm state. The thing to remember, though, is you can't just practice these in the middle of a crisis. You have to have some practice with these. And here's some great strategies that are based on our sensory and nervous system, different plans for calming and de-escalating. So this will all be emailed to you so you can kind of look at those in detail. And what worked for you might not work for one of your children. Or what works for one child might not work for another child. They need to find what works for them so that they can use those strategies. I know for one of my sons, he had to be physical, like jumping on the trampoline or going out and kicking the soccer ball. That's how he could expel his nervousness or his anger. Just deep breaths alone just didn't do it for him. So you just have to learn what works for you. And so think of your favorite things. Check with your kids about their favorite things. Share with your friends about what their favorites might be. And that can start to build your resources. And I will email you a whole bunch of my favorites. Okay. Now, the first part was, what state of the brain are we in? We can't even move forward with behavior until we're aware of that. And getting our brain into the green zone, that calm place where my parasympathetic nervous system is activated. Now, if we're going to go into understanding correcting behavior, we really need to rethink our discipline strategies. What is discipline? What do we think about consequences? What do we think about why kids do the naughty things they do? And this is a big paradigm shift. As much as I would like to think that I am this understanding neuroscience-based, counselor and parent. And when I first took one of these surveys, I'm like, oh, Ooh, I kind of have some traditional opinions about behavior that doesn't necessarily line up with the neuroscience. So I've had to adjust to some of my thoughts. Okay. So think about it. When you think about discipline, what kind of comes to your mind? Are you thinking punishment? Are you thinking grounding? Are you thinking teaching? What kind of discipline did you experience in your home, in your personal education, or in the different roles of your life? That is definitely going to influence what we think about discipline. Based on how you were raised or your life experiences, has that evolved? Do you typically use the discipline strategies that were used on you? As much as we like to say, I would never do that. Yeah, we do what we know. All right. And because behavior and working with children in a dysregulated state can be so frustrating, it's very easy to have these knee-jerk responses where without even thinking, we just kind of react. So too often we forget that discipline really means to teach, not to punish. A disciple, the root word of discipline, is a student, not a recipient of behavioral consequences. So neuroscience, we have a lot of behaviorism and behavior modification, and there are times and places for those things as well, because sometimes that works on the dopamine motivators in the brain and things like that. But a neuroscience-based approach is really shifting away from that punitive, not shifting away from consequences, but shifting away from punitive consequences. We want to teach, not punish, in order to change behavior. So this really got me when I first saw this. All right, if a child doesn't know how to read, what do? We teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, what do? We teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we punish. What do? Why is it harder to finish that last sentence other than I didn't even have to think about it with the first few? This is where we get confused. When a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach. Part of teaching is setting where the limits are. So this is not, we are throwing consequences out the window. That is not what this is. It's not, it is understanding that if we truly want to change behavior, we have to teach. I can't tell a child how to calm down until they actually know how to calm down. I can't tell a child to stop being so angry until they actually know what's the first sign in my body that I'm getting angry, so I can do something on purpose to calm down for my coping skills so that I never get to the explosion part. I taught anger management for adults for a couple of years as an LPC at Improving Lives Counseling Services. Wonderful place. I taught anger management there. And, there's so many adults that would come in and say, I have anger issues. Yeah, you have issues with your anger. That doesn't mean there can't be change. There was so little awareness of what are my triggers? What are my cues? My physical, emotional thought cues that show I'm getting angry. So I can actually catch it in the build-up stage before I get to the blow-up stage and show my anger in physically or verbally aggressive ways, and then have a big mess to clean up. There wasn't even that awareness. It's just so automatic. Behavior and negative behavior becomes automatic when that's how the brain has learned to deal with that feeling. What if I teach a different way? It takes time to develop a new brain pattern in our brain. Behavior, when a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach. Okay. Now, this is the survey I took. I went to Dr. Barbara Sorrells. I mentioned her at the beginning as one of my heroes. She's from Tulsa. Love her. She handed out this little survey. So we were supposed to mark what we thought. So traditional beliefs, a child misbehaves because they want to. A neurodevelopmental approach would, say children have a biological need to please those with whom they have an emotional connection. If you don't have an emotional connection, they don't care. They don't want to please you. If you have an emotional connection, they want to please you. Children do things just to get attention versus the neurodevelopmental approach. Children seek connection in any way they know how. Sometimes the way they know how to seek connection is through being annoying and irritating and pestering and interrupting. That's how they know how to get attention. What if you teach them a different way to get attention? Traditional beliefs would say behavior has no real purpose other than to annoy or avoid doing something, versus behavior is a form of communication. Children act out what they don't have the words to say. Bad behavior is stopped when a negative consequence is assigned to a behavior that you want to extinguish, which means get rid of. Versus appropriate behavior is taught in the same way that kids learn a new skill: modeling, guided practice, independent practice, and repetition. Traditional would say, my power to influence behavior and learning is through power and control, reward and punishment, threat and coercion. Versus, my power to influence learning behavior of a child is directly proportionate to the strength of the emotional connection. This was such a beautiful thing for me to experience as my boys became teenagers, and now as my daughter is a teenager. I parent out of the strength of my relationship. I'm not just some barking rule person. Do this, do this, do this. We have a strong connection. And when I do have to correct, or I did have to correct, there was much more of an openness to receive that correction because of the power of our relationship. All right, another: punishment and isolation are effective means of changing behavior. New behaviors are learned through instruction and correction. Another one: defiance and willfulness are the core motivators of challenging behavior, versus fear and anxiety are the core motivators of challenging behavior. Fear and anxiety create a brain state of fight, flight, or total shutdown, versus defiance and willfulness. Those are the behaviors we see. Peel that back to the feeling. It's usually fear and anxiety behind those behaviors. Challenging behavior is random and unpredictable, versus challenging behavior has a pattern. We often don't take the time to look. We brainstorm all the time with challenging students at school. We have staffings, because sometimes my perspective, I'm just seeing it in a certain way, and just getting different voices in the room makes such a difference. I remember one time we had a student that almost every single afternoon we would spend an hour to an hour and 15 minutes dealing with a massive blow up, temper tantrum, whatever. We'd done all these little things in visual schedules and, break times in the office that weren't punishment, but like just a chance to reset and calm and then go back and do some other activities. But it was like, once we took a minute to stop and think, the major time that we had an issue is when she was in the classroom and then it was time to go to specials. Okay. So we were doing a break that happened 30 minutes after she came in from recess and right before she went to specials. Well, we just shifted the break time. Instead of coming in from recess, having that time in the classroom, and then refusing to leave the classroom, we came in from recess. We had our break in the office. Then if she refused to leave the office to go to specials, it didn't matter, because then she was in a supervised place versus in the classroom during the teacher's plan time and interrupting her ability to do that. Just seeing that pattern and like, oh, we can move the time of the break made a huge difference. It didn't solve all the problems, but behavior is not just random. It has a pattern if we pay attention. Times of day, frequency, how often, all of that is good information and data to help us. Now, there's some punitive discipline and punishment versus more of an applied educational neuroscience perspective, which is based on that book, Connections Over Compliance. So discipline would be punitive, obedience driven. I want obedience, versus I want to be preventive, relational, and co-regulate with my kids. It looks punitive, zero tolerance discipline. It's going to look back at all the mistakes, versus forward at the possibilities. Punitive focuses on deficits and consequences. Where are they lacking and how am I going to, fix that through consequences, versus meeting students in their nervous system states. If they're in fight or flight, I'm going to meet them there, do purposeful things to regulate that emotion to get them back to a calm state. Now, they might have incurred some consequences in the meantime, but my focus isn't on the consequences. Responsible for who's responsible for steadying and co-regulation? Everything's put on the student in the punitive thing. They're responsible. They need to have self-control, versus I am going to be aware of my educator brain and my body states so that I can better co-regulate kiddos. When it comes to differentiation, as in how do I adapt these strategies for individual children, it's standardized in the punitive approach. You fit in this box, versus individualized in an applied approach. As far as goals, what's the goal of this? Stopping behaviors and reducing symptoms. That is the goal of a punitive approach, versus creating safety and a sense of belonging, which then brings about behaviors that we're wanting. Adults want the students to be compliant in a zero tolerance approach versus adults want the students to recognize and be aware of their nervous system states so that they can learn to apply their strategies, so that they can learn to self-regulate, so that they don't need me to co-regulate. So when they are regulated, kids will behave well when they can. When it comes to power, we want control in a typical traditional model versus I want the student to be empowered and recognize who they are and what's going to work for them, what's the culture they're creating to help themselves. As far as the nervous system states, everything is focused on the thinking brain in the punitive approach. They should know better. They need to make better choices. What were you thinking? If you are dysregulated and you're in a different brain state, you aren't thinking. You don't even have access to that part of your brain if your brain is flooded with fear, anger, anxiety, those kinds of things. A applied educational approach, recognition of the developing nervous system states, being aware, looking at the behaviors, getting curious, what might be going on underneath, teaching coping skills. The results, it's not like a zero tolerance punitive response has no results. There can be results. It can do some stopping of behaviors, but it typically isn't long-term stopping of those behaviors. Because as soon as you remove the punishment, that you cross this line or else, there's no motivation to comply. Versus I want long-term sustainable emotional, social, and cognitive health and well-being. So while you might have some more frustrations initially, man, long-term, it's awesome. It really is awesome. It's an investment, though. Now, here's the thing. We have to be aware of our own traditional thoughts versus our own neuroscience-based thoughts. This is a paradigm shift for me. Even when I went through my teacher training back in the early 90s, the whole classroom management was cognitive behavioral everything. It was sticker, check marks and write your name in the book. And that's what we were taught. We weren't taught a single thing about how to teach our kids regulation strategies. And, we were taught some things about preventive structures in the classroom to help, but it wasn't even being shared out in teacher preparation programs. I didn't know, that definitely influenced my parenting as well. So just be aware of our thinking. What if we saw negative behaviors as a symptom of a mental or emotional challenge that a child was facing? If I looked at that through kind of that empathetic lens, it would probably change my responses. If instead of they're doing this on purpose, and they're really dysregulated, I need to help them regulate. It's a whole different approach, which could get the results we want, which is regulated behavior. So again, we're talking paradigm shifts here. This isn't going to provide you every single answer for every single child. You've got to figure out those things and be curious about those things, but it has to start with the proper lens that we're looking through. Remember the paradigm shift. What we said at the beginning, a child is not giving me a hard time, the child is having a hard time. The root of discipline is to teach. I want to teach the skills they need about their own states, their own regulation, all that stuff, their own coping skills, their own choices, their own patterns, all those kinds of things. Kids do well when they can. The behavior is communication. Get curious. What's going on here? And instead of attention-seeking behavior, change this to connection-seeking behavior. Now, they might be seeking connection in a way that isn't appropriate. I want to teach them how to get that connection in a way that's appropriate. Because if we see a child differently, you will see a different child. It's been amazing to me, just even in my own stress. When I used to feel like it was my responsibility, I took responsibility for everyone's behavior and I'd stop this, you know, I'm not responsible for all their behavior, but I've worked on my co-regulation skills. I can step into a total chaotic situation and bring a sense of calm, not because I'm some superhero, because I'm applying neuroscience strategies. I'm watching my regulation so I can walk in and help a child regulate. I'm helping them understand what are you feeling in your body. I'm giving them options on what to do while at the same time setting limits. It's just totally changed my approach to kids, but it starts with a paradigm shift. Okay. Um, so now here's the deal. Consequences still have a place. This is not, oh, well, they're in fight or flight, so they couldn't help themselves. Part of co-regulation isn't just that warm, connected relationship, it's structure the environment. Part of structure is here's where the line is, do not cross this line. If you cross this line, here's the consequence that goes with that. But it's the effective consequences really make a difference. So shift from punitive focused consequences to consequences that keep the focus on the child's choice. So I've included a link in here. We did a whole class called Creative Consequences. I mean, it's an hour class of dive in deep that I offered through Oklahoma Family Network. And you can even email and say, hey, I want the consequences handouts. There's tons and tons of handouts that go with that, really focusing on good logical consequences. Some of my favorite books: Parenting with Love and Logic, The Whole Brain Child, which is the Dan Siegel book on having brain-based parenting responses. If you have a really understanding and parenting a very frustrating, easily distracted child, The Explosive Child, that's a great book by Dr. Ross Green. The Five Love Languages of Children, it's such a great book for prevention, just so wonderful. And then also Connections Over Compliance by Dr. Desautels. These are some great parenting foundation books. Consequences still have a place. But instead of you're grounded for a month, I'm going to try to find logical consequences that fit. I might even use the logical consequence called the energy drain. Man, when you lie to me, that really drains my energy. I'm going to need you to put some energy back. All right, I'm going to have you go ahead and empty the dishwasher. That'll give me some energy. I mean, you can have them doing all sorts of stuff that's actually helpful with the context of you took energy away, you give energy back. But that creative consequences class has tons of information, so I've included a link to that. All right. And there's a really good consequence wheel. This is from Dr. Lori Desautels' website about really thinking through your consequences. Are we checking in with our nonverbal communication when disciplining and delivering consequences? Because if I'm delivering the consequence in a way that might be perceived as a threat, then I just shifted the focus off of their choice and onto the threat. How am I supporting a pause to help me bring my child and myself into a steady, grounded nervous system state? I don't lose authority by taking some time to calm down and helping my child calm down. And then talking about the consequences. Do the consequences we deliver align with the infraction? Do they match? Are they providing experiences to learn in a better way? That's what I love about Parenting with Love and Logic. They have fantastic ideas for logical consequences. How can we track in patterns of how our nervous system reacts or responds to people, places, and experiences inside our own home? What are the patterns going on in the home, times of day, stuff like that. As a parent or caregiver, how can we reflect? How have we reflected on our discipline procedures, rules, and our desired outcomes? What have we learned when we stop and think about what's going on? Am I able to separate my expectations, past hurts, and agenda from my child's, meeting them and acknowledging where they are at? What are my emotional triggers? How can I model this awareness for my children and what this looks like? I need to have this kind of thinking going on to have effective consequences. A lot of times we just want the consequence to fix it. Humans are too complicated for a quick fix. So some great, great resources there. All right. And I'll include these things in the handout when this is emailed to you. But instead of shifting through this coercive regulation, meaning I'm going to force them to comply, I'm going to force them to do what I want them to do, I'm going to do co-regulation. I'm going to help them calm down and be in an emotional state that they can change their behavior. If I have to do consequences as a part of this co-regulation, it's not like those disappear, but my focus is on, I want to help them, get them in the right mental and nervous system state to be able to bring about the kind of behaviors that we want. Always helps our children actually access their thinking brain, their prefrontal cortex, in all of this. Okay. Now, final part about this. So we've had understand the brain state that our child is in. Step 2, really think about our discipline and reframe and rethink what we think about behavior and consequences. All right. Then creating connection. All of this means nothing if we don't have relationships. So important. A child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its worth. Oh my goodness. I did not, let me change that really fast. Will burn it down to feel its warmth. Oh my goodness. I should not be typing and talking at the same time. All right, here we go. Um, so that's an old African proverb. Everybody wants to be seen and known. Children want to be seen and known. Your own children want to be seen and known. They're all different. Sometimes this really overwhelming behavior is just you're not seeing me, you're ignoring me, you're neglecting me. Oh, you're going to notice me. I'll make sure I stand out. All right. So in Dr. Desautels' book, she mentions these things called touch points. These are little micro moments of connection. You don't have to go do a big thing. We're going to go hiking this weekend. We're going to go to Disney World. No, these are the day in, day out, tiny little things that create connection. Our facial expressions. When our child walks through the door, is it like, or is it, you know, I've even heard some people, they'll pick a stoplight when they're on their way home from work. And at this stoplight, they're going to set aside the worries of the day and they're going to walk in that door excited to see their family, even if they've had a rough day, just like a puppy does. They're so excited to see you, so much of our facial expressions doesn't always communicate that. What's our tone? How do we greet our kids? What do we notice? How do we validate them? Deep listening, really effective communication is so, so powerful. And in following the kids' agenda, it's not, if I want to really connect with a child, it's not, they're going to come to me on my terms. I meet them where they're at. Such a huge, huge difference. All right. How are we doing on time? I know we started a little bit late, so I'm going to go a little bit over, and that'll be okay. All right. So this Dr. Jacob Ham, he's really good. I love his videos, but this is why it's so important for us to be known, to feel it's an integral part of our development. So let's watch this video.
Today, I thought that I would try to explain this thing that I call the nurturance of being known. And it's really, really profound, but it's really hard to explain. So I don't know how well this is going to go, but let's just see what happens. The gist of the idea is that being known by another person is as vital to life as being fed, clothed, taken care of is for a very, very small baby. It's life or death. So the argument goes like this. It starts with the idea that human beings consist of 4 different types of selves. And this is your body, your emotions, your conceptual and linguistic self, and then yourself in terms of identity and meaning, which basically means who am I and what is the world really about. So then what happens is that with development, each self comes online, and then the task of that developmental stage is to use other people to learn to regulate that self, and that stabilizes the self. Okay, so for instance, let's start with just the body. So infants are born and they're utterly helpless and incapable of regulating their own bodily states, right? So the parent has to soothe them, clothe them, feed them, put them on a sleep schedule, and when they're upset, they pick them up and they don't just hold them, they actually bounce them and rock them, right? So what happens is that the caregiver provides this kind of rhythmic input, and that rhythm actually stabilizes the whole nervous system. And then in the middle of infancy, the emotional self comes online, right? And this is when babies are making eye contact and trying to smile at everyone they see. And you all know that we can't help but smile back when an infant cries, right? We're biologically wired to be attuned to babies and respond to them. So this kind of attunement actually helps the baby survive and stay regulated emotionally, but it also helps them learn to tolerate extremes of emotion and to learn to calm themselves back down when emotions get too hot. So then in the next stage, this linguistic self, what happens is that the baby's capabilities for language comes online, and sure enough, parents start talking to their babies even though they don't understand a word that's being said. But we all somehow instinctively know that babies need to hear language to start activating that linguistic self. At this stage, this really curious thing happens where it becomes super important for parents to have to repeat what the child says. So for instance, I was having lunch with my friend and her son was really fascinated with trucks, and every time a truck would pass by, he would start saying truck. And if she didn't say truck fast enough, then he would say truck. truck, truck. And he would become desperate and panicky about it as he's pointing to the truck. And then my friend would be talking to me, and then very quickly she would say, yeah, that's a truck. And then he would calm back down, and then he would keep scanning for the next truck, and then it would start all over again. So again, there's this desperate urgency that I think mimics what it felt like to be an infant desperately crying and hoping that your parents will figure out what that cry is about and then take care of that need. And then finally, in this last stage where identity becomes so important, this is the adolescent stage, by the way. Teenagers all desperately need to feel like they belong and that they're known by another person. They start looking for boyfriends and girlfriends, and one of the key things that drives them to be attracted to another person is whether or not they like the same music as them, they have the same interests or share the same values. And really, it comes down to finding someone who just gets them. And so I think even in that sense, there's this desperate feeling that being known is just as vital as being known in terms of shared language and joint attention in toddlerhood, and in terms of like being known in terms of like knowing what your cries are about in infancy. And in this sense, I think that a traumatized person, and anyone actually, has to feel known at every level of their being. So to conclude, the first and most important step to take in learning how to really work with a person with trauma is to really get good at attunement and just working on, I want to get to know you and understand you on every level of your being. Because honestly, a lot of traumas involve the fact that people with abuse or neglect are ultimately deprived of those experiences from very early in life. And so we have to kind of give them those early experiences that they never got. I hope this makes sense to you guys, and I hope I've been able to communicate just how important this thing is. Let me know.
I just love him. He is so, I just could listen to his voice all day. It's so calming. We want to be seen and known. Like it
If you
said
have
at
any,
the beginning of the video, it is just as important as eating. There's another, you might have heard of it before, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's kind of this pyramid where I first have to meet my physiological needs, like food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep, my basic human needs, before I can even move to this next level where I can feel safe and secure, before I can move to this next level where I feel love and belonging, where I can have friendship, family, intimacy, a sense of connection, which then takes me to the next level. If those needs are met, then my self-esteem, like my confidence, my respect of others, my, self-awareness and all that, and positive self-image. Finally, this upper part, which is where we want kids to be a lot of times without having these underneath things, where they have their morality, their creativity, their curiosity, they're able to learn, they're able to become the best version of themselves. They literally can't get up here and have all these wonderful, awesome, wonderful behaviors, compliant, obedient behaviors, if we haven't met these needs. So safety and security. When children are in a dysregulated emotional state, they don't feel safe. It's just bottom line. They can't move on. They can't calm down. They can't do what we want until they feel safe, and their brain has to feel safe. So that's that where it really helps us to help them calm down, for that feeling of safety. Also, a predictable environment and structuring the environment helps create a feeling of safety and security. Love and belonging. This is where we help create social connections to allow the kids to feel loved in friendship and like they belong. Be purposeful about the time you spend with your kids so they feel loved. When a child learns what it feels like and means to belong, it helps them develop a healthy sense, personal identity. There's also a class, the 5 love languages of children, that we offered through Oklahoma Family Network. That great strategies. I'll talk about that in a minute. Self-esteem is when a child feels love and is secure, then they can meet the next step, which is developing this positive self-esteem, a positive, healthy image, and eventually get to this higher level of self-actualization where they can focus on personal growth and learning and self-awareness and really take off setting their goals. We cannot get this wonderful purple behavior that we want without creating safety and security, love and belonging. Those are core things that are made through creating connections. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be these huge things, just like the touch point says, it's these daily meaningful interactions. Here's an example of a simple one. I had a lady who took parenting classes, step parenting classes at Family and Children's, and she had this habit. It was a ritual she did every day that before she started the car, she would say, one thing I like about you is, And she would say this to each of her two sons. She remarried and now had a stepson, the son of her new husband, who really struggled with behavior. They had had a very toxic divorce, lots of trauma, and so he comes into the house like a little tornado and had been in therapy already for 3 years of his young life. And just being around Kelly every day, just turning on the car. One thing I like about you is, to her two sons and to him. The dad said 3 months of that was better than 3 years of therapy. Just that simple ritual of connection. Building in those rituals makes such a difference. I'm also a huge believer in the five love languages of children. It's a very simple book, and it's simple but profound. And so I've included a link when you get this to that particular class, and you can always email Erin at the Oklahoma Family Network. She's the one you received your emails from, if you want to get the handouts that go with that. But speaking to a child in their love language and spending time with them makes them actually feel loved. So big, profound things there. Now, the other thing too is empathy. Oops, I gotta keep going. When we respond with empathy, true empathy, it actually releases oxytocin, releases that chemical that makes us feel in love. When we have these nurturing moments with our child, it releases oxytocin. It builds the bond. And again, sometimes, just start with a Google. I actually Googled, all right, what are some habits, that parents can do to strengthen relationships with their kids? Well, this is 10 habits to strengthen relationships with their kids. One thing was aim for 12 hugs a day or physical connections every day. Just building in that physical connection, tousling of the hair, quick hug, quick back scratch can really help. Play with them. Turn off technology when you're interacting with your child. Connect before transitions. Kids have a hard time transitioning from one to another. So when they don't want to give things up and move on to maybe a non-preferred activity, give them a look in the eye, use their name, connect with them. That can help with transitions. Make time for one-on-one time. Welcome emotion. Yeah, emotions are inconvenient, but they're a part of life. Teach kids not to be afraid of their feelings. Help them identify their feelings. You identify your own feelings. Man, I am feeling really frustrated right now. That's helping them realize if we're going to have these feelings, it's okay. Listen and empathize. Slow down and savor the moments. Bedtime snuggles and chats really can build that bond and show up. Just showing up, going to their things. These are all things that are simple, but if you have these habits, can really make a big difference. What if you even did something like make a family calm down bucket together? So when we are in these emotional states, we can calm down. I'm also a big believer in family meetings for problem solving together, and that creates a really safe space to solve problems together. So family meetings could be a great tool for making your family feel closer and connected, even while solving problems. Can be a great thing. So kind of covered a lot tonight. So just kind of a brief recap. First off, in order for us to be effective parents and respond to children's behavior, we have to understand what mental state they're in, what nervous system state they're in. And that'll all be emailed to you again to kind of look over and refresh your memory. If they are in a fight, flight, or shutdown mode, doing things on purpose to help co-regulate them, come alongside them to create that safe space where they can process and calm, get to a nervous system state of calm. That's where the behaviors we're looking for are going to happen. All right. Then really rethink your discipline strategies. What's working? What's not working? What are your thoughts about why kids do what they do? Do we need to shift some paradigms in that area? Change our thinking about that. Because if we change our thinking and we see kids in a different way, we're going to see a totally different child. And then that final really important piece is creating those connecting moments, because from a foundation of safety and connecting and loving and belonging comes a more regulated nervous system state, comes the behavior that we're looking for. It's all pieces of a puzzle. And they all interconnect. And the beauty of working with big humans and little humans is it's unpredictable and interesting. And, it never a dull moment. Some moments are more frustrating than others, but it's just being a parent has helped me grow more than anything in my life, to be honest, and make me grow as an individual and also in skill set and awareness and understanding. And sometimes it's the desperation of trying to deal with a frustrating behavior that promotes us to do that. So hopefully this was helpful. You'll have all of this emailed to you, and you will also get a follow-up email that has additional handouts and things like that. So in the presentation, I tried to embed as many different links and videos and things that I could that you might be able to take time to watch again later. So that is our class for tonight.